Because she probably doesn't understand how the law works, former Reddit CEO says popular pro-Trump forum should be banned. The Donald has over 740,000 subscribers. Why should it be banned? Because she doesn't like their opinions? Because they say things that are incorrect? This is one of the biggest conundrums in the free speech, digital marketplace of ideas, etc. fights. And one of my stances is that we should never allow the government or private corporation to restrict access based on intelligence or opinion, because then they turn around and wield it against everybody. The question is easily posed. Who would you trust to censor information? Pick somebody. Who would you trust? Because the reality is most people are going to be like, I'm not going to pick you. And the other side says, I'm not going to pick you. So who has rights over each other? It doesn't work that way. The only thing we can really do is say people should have access. Well, let's read the story. And I've got I got a bunch lined up here. We're going to talk about a lot of things. There's also, this is very important, the censorship isn't stopping, okay? Bounding Into Comics recently had its Facebook page removed. I don't know why. It's not really, the story talks about how they say they violated posting content that infringes other people's rights. Maybe it was a copyright issue. They mentioned posting a trailer for, I believe, Spider-Man. Maybe that's it. So that's possible. But I do want to point out, for whatever reason they got shut down, Bounding Into Comics, it's a NewsGuard verified site. And the only concerns they have is they're not familiar with a correction policy, and the website doesn't say who owns it. But other than that, it's a credible source. So the censorship isn't stopping. But let's see what's going on here. For MarketWatch, Sean Langlios writes, Reddit's The Donald Group claims 740,000 subscribers, or patriots, as they call themselves. This raucous corner of the internet is home to all things wonderful about Trump and tends to get slammed by critics as toxic to the public discourse. From Islamophobia and misogyny to disinformation and propaganda, the group is often called out for violating Reddit's rulebook. Yet even as more sites have been purged across social media, the Donald is still going strong. But why? Let former Reddit CEO Ellen Pao explain it. She says, well, I don't know if this is a quote from a different part of the story, but we'll read it. The fear that platform employees have of their users drives a lot of decision making in ways you don't expect. My guess is that there's a lot of fear of people who are running and using the Donald. It's not a subreddit that is following the rules or should actually be there. What rules? And who chooses who to get banned, when you get banned, right? So here's the problem. Reddit has rules. I understand that. And I had a really fascinating conversation with David Pakman yesterday on my main channel. You should really check it out. It's really good stuff. It's not so much a debate as it is really a good faith dialectic, right? Of course, there's probably going to be people on the right who don't like David, who disagree. There's going to be people on the left who don't like me. And clearly, we've had our share of negative comments. In fact, I told it to David, because we both did the stream talking about censorship, free market, civil rights. And he was like, it's good if we both do it on our channels. And I was like, right, but we're going to have a large portion of both of our bases no to the other side. But there will be probably a lot of people who respect and understand that we're trying, right? I think David operates in good faith for the most part. And I'm sure there's a lot of people who disagree, but you just got to recognize if you don't like him, he has fans who say the exact same thing about me. And I know I'm doing what I believe. I'm operating in good faith. So it's fascinating. But the reason I bring this up is, in it, we talk about whether or not a business has a right to remove somebody and whether or not Twitter actually removes people based on their identity, their protected status, or their ideas. And he brings up a really interesting point that we're seeing in the digital world. He's right. It was a really fascinating point. Twitter, Reddit, for instance, if Reddit bans the Donald, they're not banning the Donald because of their identity. It's because of the ideas they express. So even if Reddit removes them and people claim it was politically biased, they can argue we didn't remove them because they're Trump supporters. And that's technically true, which brings us to a really, really important distinction. This is what my response to David was, because David said, listen, if a Muslim says something from the Quran and gets banned, that's not because they're Muslim, it's because of the idea they expressed. So the idea and the identity are actually separate, because Twitter doesn't have a policy saying, no Muslims allowed. And I'm like, you're right. The reason it's an important distinction is that a non-Muslim could express the exact same idea, right? You could be a straight person and say something about gay rights. Twitter can still ban you. It's nothing to do with you being gay. It's the idea. So now we have the question, should ideas pertaining to a protected class be a protected right. And this is a mind-blowing revelation that, I wasn't I wasn't really thinking about. And David brought it up based on, so I sent him this court testimony where Twitter argued that they have no obligation to push someone else's ideas. And that's a really fascinating point. So how do we protect, right? Let's put it this way. He's right. A gay person can go on Twitter and say, here's why you should be, why it's okay to be gay. And Twitter can be like, removed, your idea is gone. And it's not a violation of that person's civil rights because it wasn't because they were gay, because anyone could have said the exact same thing. You could be straight and still agree with what they were saying. This is kind of worrisome because think about where that leads us. If you want to argue in favor of civil rights, you need to express the ideas. And now Twitter has an exemption to remove any thought, any protest. That's crazy. So it's a challenge because how do you associate ideas with groups? You really can't. This is where the problem gets really, really interesting, but this is where Ellen Pao gets it wrong. Now, first, I want to point out current CEO Steve Huffman says, let everyone talk. Sunlight is the best disinfectant, though I don't think they actually do that because they quarantine a lot of pages. But Ellen Pao says regulation will give CEOs an excuse to take on people and their bad behavior in a way that they wouldn't have to explain and defend, and perhaps they wouldn't get as much abuse heaped on them. So they kind of have the justification out of their hands, Pao explained in an interview. Well, she's completely wrong. As we saw from Will Chamberlain over at Human Events, I did a video with him. I thought this is good stuff, and that's why I want to make sure I give Will a shout out because he highlights the Supreme Court case, Packingham versus North Carolina, where he says a unanimous Supreme Court decision holding that the First Amendment prohibits federal and state governments from restricting your access to social media, meaning, Ellen, regulation can only ratchet in one direction, protecting speech. The government, the Supreme Court of this country unanimously decreed the government has no authority to tell you you can't do something. So there will not be a regulation that will stop hate speech. In fact, any regulation will only guarantee your right. So here's the thing. I think the way Will frames it with platform access being a civil right is probably, it solves a lot of problems. Because think about the thing I mentioned earlier, separating the idea from the identity. How do you associate those things? You really can't. And we're not going to make a civil rights provision that says like ideas are protected. But we can say individuals cannot be removed based on their ideas. The only thing they can be removed for is criminal behavior, illegal behavior. And there is a line there. There is nuance, right? What constitutes harassment? If the police take action, then I think they can take your account down for the duration of the process by which you're, in court and all that stuff, right? So there's a lot that we have to work out to make the world better and work for everybody. So first of all, you can't regulate based on algorithm. So if we said you can't remove someone's content, does that mean YouTube still has to show your video in the recommended feed? I believe the answer is they don't. They pick winners and losers. They should let subscribers see you in their feed, and that's it. But for Twitter, which is reverse chronological and algorithmic, but for those that opt for a reverse chronological feed, same is true for Facebook, they should not be able to screw with that. That's, you showing up and speaking. And so there's a lot here. There is. But I want to get to, there's one other thing that I want to bring up. I got a lot, actually. But essentially, we're going to come to a point where we have to decide as a society how we ban people, when we ban people, why we ban people, and that's probably vague, but to be more specific, if you break the law, how long do you get banned for? We can't do permanent suspensions, right? That's like a digital life sentence. So we have to say, let's say you repeatedly send something that's not threatening, but is harassment. Because, listen, if you call someone on the phone and keep saying things to them and they hang up and you call them back and you keep doing it, even if you're not sending threats, it's harassment. There's even disorderly conduct. It's possible that going on Twitter and posting crazy things over and over again could be deemed disorderly conduct. And I mean that seriously. If you go into a shopping center and start yelling things about your political beliefs, they might say, hey, this is disorderly conduct. It's one thing to speak and hold up a sign. It's another thing to yell at the top of your lungs. There's a line, and it's the discretion of the police, and it goes to the courts. So if you do cross that line, at what point do we, like, seriously, comment below. Let's talk about this because we got to work these things out. If we determine you can only be removed for breaking the law, how long do you get removed for? Are you removed, and then if you get bail, they give you a temporary, like, they bring your account back? So, like, how do we deal with that? Like, when you're accused of a crime, the judge offers up a bail or none, and if you're on bail, you are free to go about your thing with certain restrictions, like depending on the crimes, like, oh, you can't drive, you can't go on the internet, you can't drink, etc. Bail conditions. But how do we do that for the internet? And that's where things start getting murky. We are at the forefront of a new world, and we need to make sure we do it right. There's one more thing I do want to point out, though, and it's that it's not just about censorship. It's also about the fact that these platforms do choose winners and losers. And what that means is they can say, fine, you can stay on the platform, but no one will ever see your post again, so you're effectively gone. At least, however, in the instance of bounding into comics. For whatever reason they're banned for, I don't know. Sure, they're permanently suspended or whatever, their page was removed, right? It's just gone. They would still exist. They wouldn't appear in your feed because that's promotion, but at least people can still go to them who like them, and that's something else. So we have to figure this out. I will end by saying Ellen Pao doesn't understand the regulation, and she doesn't understand the First Amendment. The story goes on to say, the call to rid social media of dangerous accounts is getting louder. Just last week, Facebook, in its latest purge of controversial accounts, announced it was removing several fringe right-wing voices, Alex Jones, Milo Yiannopoulos, Laura Loomer. I think it's really interesting, though, how a lot of these stories ignore Paul Joseph Watson. Because the truth is, I wouldn't call Paul Joseph Watson far-right. I would call him probably like center-right libertarian, but very aggressive. So far-right typically refers to the ideology which someone holds, and so does far-left. Someone who's far-right, presumably, it's typically associated with like ultra-traditionalism and race realism, etc. And Paul Joseph Watson doesn't fall into those categories. He is, however, aggressive in his beliefs on immigration and other controversial, like, conservative positions, in which case he's not fringe right-wing, and thus, unsurprisingly, they don't list him here. And also, I will point out, fringe right-wing is probably incorrect, considering, you know, Milo and Laura and Paul have tons of followers. So fringe may just be another smear. But I will say, they're certainly not, you know, like Alex, Milo, and Laura. It's not like they're on TV on Fox News. Like Tucker Carlson is mainstream. So at least he didn't say far right. But again, the point I'm trying to make with this last bit is that they typically don't include Paul. Like, no, I'm not kidding. A lot of these stories don't highlight him. They just say, and also Paul Joseph Watson was banned because he's kind of just a snarky commentator. He's not, you know, don't like his opinions, sure, but he's far from the worst of the worst. And more importantly, he's got millions of followers, as did Milo. They're not fringe just because you think they are. Maybe that's a bad thing. I don't know. I'm not saying that. The point is, the regulation doesn't work this way. I'll leave it there. So, you know, it is what it is. We got a lot of things to figure out. And I've got another video coming up on my main channel at 4 p.m., youtube.com/Timcast, 4 p.m. Eastern. Yes, it is a different channel. I will see you there.